Hey guys, this is Jennifer, and this is the Jennifer Allwood Show, the podcast where you learn how to create a beautiful home and build a creative business. Grab a cup of coffee, find a cozy spot in the house, and let's chat. I'm excited you're here. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here again with me this week. And this week we are talking about making a pivot in your business. This is episode number 79, where we talk about pivoting. And I'm going to try really hard just to say the word pivot a million times in this podcast without giggling and thinking of Ross on Friends. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, you're either A, way too young, or B, you have not seen that Friends episode and you need to run on over to YouTube and just do a quick little search for pivot, Ross, Friends. It's hysterical. Okay. So basically it's just a turn. And there was a sofa involved and all the things, and it was super fun. So we're going to talk about how to know when you need to pivot in your business, signs that you need to do that. I'm going to talk to you about my personal experience with pivoting and some of the emotions that will certainly arise when your business needs to take a twist and a turn, and how to deal with those. Okay, so first, I'm going to read to you a podcast review over from iTunes. So this one is from Golf and Sunsets. Love the business name. And she says that a friend, a fellow creative, encouraged her to listen to my podcast, episode number 34, Virtual Working and Do It At All. I've listened to that episode 4 times. I've been doing it all and trying to figure out how I can be creative, as I'm the only one that can do such. Jennifer has such wonderful words of encouragement. Her podcasts are uplifting, they're encouraging, and they're to the point. Exactly what I needed as a new Etsy shop and social media newbie. Listen, Golf and Sunsets, I am super stoked. The fact that you would sit through one of my episodes 4 times makes you like winning the internet right now. So thanks, man. I'm serious. That's awesome. And so if you have not listened to episode number 34, apparently that spoke to her soul. So you may want to run over and do that. So thank you again so much. So let's talk about what pivoting means exactly in a business, okay? Pivoting is defined in the dictionary as a turn, like a change of direction, a change of focus. It's abandoning a previous business effort in order to make a concerted effort towards a new goal. That is right from the dictionary, my friends, from the dictionary. And so a pivot is any time when, you're kind of heading in one direction and you think, okay, we're going to just shift slightly here, shift slightly, or shift majorly. And so I've had several times, you guys, where I've had to make a pivot in my business. And I thought it would be helpful if I kind of told you about the 4 major pivots that I've made that I can kind of discuss with you real quick here over the course of owning my business for the last almost 18 years. So the first pivot came right after I started my business. Literally 3 months after beginning the business, I became pregnant with our oldest son, Noah, who is right now 16. And so I had to start hiring people. And that was a pivot. I was the one who was used to being out in the field, and I was the one who was used to, slapping all the paint literally on the walls. And so it was uncomfortable for me to make that shift, to like kind of release the reins, if you will, and let other people kind of start doing the real creative part of it. And for me to pivot and shift over to the part where I was then just marketing the business. After I had Noah, I can just remember thinking to myself, I will do whatever necessary to stay home and stare at the face of this colicky, cranky baby every day for the rest of my life. So how can I make that happen? And so the pivot was necessary in order for me to stay home. So that was the first really big pivot that I made in my business. The next one came about 4 years ago, because I had that thing kind of in auto drive for a long time, friends. We had, 2 more children after Noah, and everything was going well. But then about 4 years ago, I decided to make a pivot into the online space. And if you have gone through my Creators Roadmap course, you know exactly the pivot that I'm talking about, because we did a whole little video series on it. But basically, the pivot came for me when I had an epiphany one day. We were working in a client's home, a beautiful house that was taking a team of 8 women painting every day for 6 weeks. And it was a huge project, and it wasn't right up the street from us, you guys. It was a drive, and I can just remember leaving the job site one day. It was new construction, and I can remember thinking to myself, man, like, why do we not have any more money than we do? Can anybody relate to that? Like, what's wrong with our finances that I am out here like busting my butt? We've been in this house for 6 weeks. I did a good job like bidding it. So why don't we have any more money in the bank account? And that day was pivotal for me. And I can tell you why, because I can remember driving home from that job site thinking, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. And I didn't want for it to be me to add a whole nother crew of girls working in another client's house. Like that to me just sounded awful. And so in my head, I just kept thinking there has to be something different. And the only thing I could come up with was, well, I could teach people how to paint online. There's tons of painting classes that people go to, in local communities or cities across the United States. But I don't know of anybody that's teaching people how to paint online. And I know for me, I didn't like to leave my house to have to go, to training or business classes then because we had little kids or littler kids than what they are now. And so 4 years ago, I decided to pivot and shift to the online space. So that was really key for where we are currently today. So the next pivot came about a year after that. So I started selling like painting videos online, and that was all going really well. But then about 3 years ago, in fact, 3 years ago, this month was pivotal for me. I decided to start coaching other creative entrepreneurs on how to build their social media and build their online platform. So several people had been leaving me voicemails on an answering machine because, 4 years ago, we still had an answering machine. They would private message me, they would email me, and they would ask me, how have you grown your audience is so big? And at the time, I probably had maybe 200,000 Facebook followers, not anything compared to what I do today, but still I was getting a lot of requests. And so 3 years ago this month, I decided to step into the role of being a business coach and made that pivot from just teaching how to paint your cabinets and your furniture to now teaching you how to build your online business so that you can sell the heck out of whatever it is that you make or create. So that was 3 years ago. And then last year was the last major pivot that we have had in my business. And this happened one day when I had been thinking that we needed to close my decorative painting company in Kansas City. I'd been thinking that needed to happen for about a year and a half. And I just was holding on to it, you guys. Like, oh man, I was like, had a death grip on that sucker. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to let it go. It was my baby. I had worked so hard on that business and I loved it so much. And we had a great reputation in the community and more work than I knew what to do with. And yet I knew that God was telling me that I needed to close that part of my business because it's so hard when you have two pieces of your business going and there's a double-mindedness. And if you guys would like for me to do a podcast on the topic of double-mindedness, I can absolutely do that. In fact, I think we have a blog post on it, and I will absolutely in the show notes on my website, I'm writing it down so I don't forget. I will link to the double-mindedness blog post that I have. And so essentially every day I was working online, and yet we had clients and girls working in the field, and it was very difficult for me to continue doing both. And so again, I remember distinctly the day I was out on a jog. Some of you might want to call it a walking jog. So I was out on a jog, and I distinctly remember the Lord saying, go home and shut it down. And I'm like, oh, what? Like, okay, all right. Yes, Lord. Wasn't anticipating it to be that day, but I knew that it was coming. And so that's the last major shift that we made in my business. So maybe you can look back on your business and you can see like along the way where things changed. The industry changed. What you were selling changed. How you were selling it changed. Your staff changed. But major points in your business when you've made a pivot. And there may also be some of you who are thinking to yourself, gosh, I don't know. I don't know that I've had a pivot, and I don't know that I need one. And I'd love to tell you a couple of signs that you're needing a pivot, all right? Like you are needing that Ross moment where they're trying to get the sofa up that staircase that takes a lot of twists and turns, and they are needing to pivot. And some of your businesses are desperate for a pivot right now. So here are some signs that you're desperately in need of a pivot. Are you ready? Okay, number one, you're feeling a nudge from the Lord. This is also, you can call it your gut instinct. You can call it your intuition. You can call it when you're out on a walk and the Lord tells you to go home and shut down your painting business. You call it that. I'm going to call it a nudge from God. Okay. And so that literally, when that feeling happens, you know that you know. You know that you know that you have got to make that shift. Is it scary? Absolutely. But is it worth it? 100%. Okay. So that's the first sign you need to pivot. Sign number 2, literally your business is stuck or you're not growing at all. Like if that has happened and you're just feeling like things are starting to kind of go backwards, your sales are starting to go down. Maybe that feeling of you being stuck is making you to where your heart's just not in it anymore. Those are really good signs that it's time for a pivot in your business. All right. Another sign that you need to pivot is when you can tell that the market is doing a serious change. Listen, the other night, Ava, baby, God bless her, she wanted to go to the pet store. And you guys, I'm just not into animals. I love you all. Please don't send me hate mail. But the only animal on the face of this planet that I'm obsessed with is my very own dog, Stella, who is the best dog on the face of the planet. And so I love her absolutely so much. But Ava Grace, she wanted to go to the pet store. So we drive over to the pet store, and right next to the pet store used to be a Toys R Us. And so Jason took Ava into the pet store because they wanted to see like hamsters or gerbils or something icky like that. And so I sat in the car and I answered some emails and got a little bit of work done. And I just sat and I stared at that Toys R Us and I was thinking to myself, man, the market has changed so much. I can tell you what drove Toys R Us out of business, and it's Amazon. It is Amazon. It is Amazon. It is Target shopping online. It is the online space. The market has been changing. And so if you are in an industry where you can see that your market is really shifting, then baby, you better be shifting too. That is the time to make a pivot so that you don't end up like a Toys R Us with an empty parking lot, because that's just so sad. Another sign you might be needing to pivot is when your profits are seriously declining. So if you've noticed when you're looking at the books that you're not making as much as you were last year or 2 years ago, or things have significantly dropped, it is time to look at what you're doing and determine, what can we change? What can we change? Where do we need to shift some things? And the last but not least sign that you're in need of a pivot is when you're bored. Sister, listen to me. One of the best things that can happen to your business, and I know you're not going to believe me, but it's when you are seriously frustrated, seriously burned out, or seriously bored. And I mean that with everything in me. People want to shy away from those emotions because they think, well, there must be something wrong with me, especially as creative entrepreneurs that get to work from home and we get the luxury of like putting our kids on the bus and then crafting all day. And we kind of feel guilty when we're burned out because, you know, we've got friends who are going to 9-to-5s that they hate, and we've got this different experience, and it almost makes us feel bad to complain about the experience we're having. But if you are literally bored stiff, or you are burned out, it is such a great sign. Honey, it's time for a pivot. It is time for a shift. And if you will really lean into those emotions instead of running from them, you will see that those feelings of being burned out and those feelings of being bored can actually be such a blessing for your business and can bring about really, really great changes. I mean, when you think about this from a spiritual level, if you never got bored or, you know, kind of burned out with the way you were doing things, you probably would have very little reason sometimes to change. So I think God will often use those emotions that frustrate us to like do these little tiny shifts to get us actually to doing the thing that he wants us to do. Okay. I want to give you guys an example. I had a really great conversation last week in my inner circle with a woman named Rebecca, who owns the Renaissance Gypsy. And if you have not checked out Rebecca before and her Renaissance Gypsy Facebook page, you need to do that. She does like one-of-a-kind furniture, painting, creations, one-of-a-kind jewelry. She's very, very talented. So Rebecca has had a brick and mortar for the Renaissance Gypsy, and she's absolutely loved it. But the problem has been that there's serious pressure in covering the overhead. There's just a lot of stress, as any of you brick and mortar people know. There's a lot of stress in terms of you've got to be at the shop, you've got to have it open, getting foot traffic into the door, the light bill, you know, the water line broke, the bathrooms overflowed, or, you know, whatever. And I'm not saying those are Renaissance Gypsies experiences, but there is stress in owning a brick and mortar. If you've ever considered owning a brick and mortar, listen, some people, it's just a perfect situation for. Others of you have some things you probably should consider. So if you'll go back and listen to episode number 67 on my podcast is entitled, So You Want to Open Up Your Own Store, Boutique, or Shop. So go listen to that. So listen, Renaissance Gypsy is no different than any other brick and mortar owner. And there is just always that lingering thing of, making sure that overhead is covered. There's the pressure of being there all the time, etc. Well, so I was talking to Renaissance Gypsy on an inner circle call. We were discussing how she's been feeling for a while like it was probably time to shift out of the brick and mortar and shift fully into the online space. And I wanted to ask her, because I'm always curious why some entrepreneurs who, by the way, have some of the best gut instincts in the world, or you couldn't be an entrepreneur. So I'm always sometimes curious of, okay, so if this is what you're thinking that you want to do, or this is kind of the nudge that you feel like you're getting to do, like, tell me kind of what's holding you back. And I think that this is probably a situation for a lot of entrepreneurs, is sometimes I think that the concern is that if I make a shift in the business, the perception will be that how I was doing it before was not successful, or that I don't, love the community I'm in if I take it online instead of serving my local community. Friends, those are not realities. They are just vain imaginations, is what I'm going to call those. And so Rebecca and I were able to kind of talk through what that would look like if she would be able to shut the doors of her brick and mortar, and her family is super important to her. So, and allowing her to spend more time doing and spending the time with the people and the things that matter most to her. I mean, that's a win. You guys, there's no way you can look at that situation and think that that's a failure. That is a pivot that Renaissance Gypsy is more than likely going to be making. And I'm so, so proud of her. So you guys, pivots are going to be uncomfortable. They are going to be scary, but they're also very much necessary. If we didn't have pivots in our business, I would still be sponge painting roosters and fern leaves on heavily textured walls like we were 17 years ago at my Magic Brush company. So pivots are not a sign of failure. They're a sign that you are fluid as a business owner. You are flexible. You have the ability to adapt to change, and you have the ability to sense the shifting of seasons and stay in line with that. So even though change is painful and growth is painful, I want you to remember that there is nothing more painful than being stuck in a season or in a place that you no longer belong. And so for some of you who are listening to me talk on this podcast today, you already know that a pivot is necessary. You just need someone to give you the permission to do it, which I'm doing right here. I'll be your permission granter. And just the encouragement that, honey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Listen, you can do small pivots. Small pivots make big changes, by the way. One time I was listening to our pastor, and I'm going to just really ruin this story. So just know in advance that I'm terrible with these kind of details, like literally just so bad. In fact, I'm probably making up this entire story that I'm about to tell you, but no, I'm not really. So anyway, I can remember our pastor one time preaching something about how the people that go up in the rockets, what do they call astronauts? So how astronauts, just by doing the slightest shift in their coordinates by 1 degree, will make them end up like on a completely different planet. So don't discount just those really small shifts. Those small shifts can often make really, really big changes. All right. Listen, a few months ago, I was driving down the highway and I went back into my notes, and I'm pretty sure that this was in January. I will double check that for sure. But I was driving down the highway, and this has never happened to me before in the time that I've been working my business. But I was driving down the highway and just thinking about nothing. And how many of you are ever just thinking about nothing and you have like a thought just like plop into your mind and you're like, is that you, Lord? I think that could be you. And listen, this is what the thought was that popped into my head. The Lord told me that there would be a double blessing for people who were willing to transition in their businesses, even when it was super uncomfortable. And he said that there would be a double for your trouble anointing. And I gave that word on my Facebook business page. And you guys, I could not believe how many people messaged me after that and told me about the big, hard, scary things that they decided to do, the shifts that they decided to make, the pivots that they decided to make in their business. And then right behind that, the blessing that came. So I understand that pivots and shifts and changes and all the things, man, I like change about as much as the next guy. I don't like it at all. This is why I still have 80s hair, you guys. This is why I still back home my 80s hair. I do not like change necessarily. But I still believe that word from the Lord applies to anybody who could be listening to this podcast today. And I want you to do me a favor. I want you to send us an email to podcast@jenniferallwood.com. If you know that word is for you, and if you make a shift in your business and I want to know what happened, I will put a link to that Facebook video in the show notes so that you can go back and listen to what I said in its entirety. And it was uncomfortable for me. It's one of the first times that I had felt like I got a "thus saith the Lord" moment. And I was like, oh man, my Facebook page is going to think that I'm an absolute puke. But I'm so glad that I delivered that to them. And I'm so glad that so many people were obedient and the blessing that was on the other side of that. I love how my pastor says, you never know who or what is on the other side of your obedience. So friend, if you are being nudged, if you are bored, if you are knowing that there are changes going on in your market, you feel totally stuck, you know you need a shift, I encourage you to not delay it even 1 second longer. Start putting some things into place today so that your business can grow and thrive. So pivots are necessary. At the end of the day, I know that to be true. And for some of you, if you would just pull that Band-Aid off quickly, it would be so much better. Remember that God's love language is obedience. So thank you guys for being here today. I just appreciate you so much. I appreciate every time that someone tells me so-and-so sent me to listen to your podcast, or my friend so-and-so sent me over here. And so if you listen to this and it just resonated with you at all, I'm so glad. If you would go over to iTunes and leave us a review, that would just make my heart so happy. But if while you were listening to this, if you were thinking about your precious sister-in-law who just started an Etsy account, or you're thinking about your neighbor who is so talented and her business is just kind of doing ho-hum, and you kind of think this may be a word for her, would you share this podcast with them? I don't have my podcast app up on my phone right in front of me, but I feel like there's a button, y'all. I feel like there's like a little button, like a share button, or you can screenshot it and text it, whatever you need to do. Get a pigeon, have them carry a little note. But if you wouldn't mind sharing this episode so that it can touch someone in their business, I would be so honored. So thank you again for being here. And until next week, you stay creative. Bye-bye. Hey friend, thank you so much for listening to the podcast again this week. I'm so honored that you're here and that you just listen week in and week out, and that you share the Jennifer Allwood Show with your friends and family. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey, don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, or if you're an Android user, go download the Stitcher app and you can subscribe there so that you know every single week when a new episode releases. Also, if you have any time to leave us a review, these reviews are super important in getting guests for the show and sponsors for the show. And so we'd appreciate it if you have just a second to leave us a review. That would be amazing. Thank you guys again for being here. And until next week, stay creative.